let's start with know your audience, and really the importance here of this section is getting a sense of who are you working with, not only on kind of the target audience, whose stories are you collecting, what community are you working with, but also who are the right partners to be around the table from the get-go. And so we'll kind of draw on some of our experiences here and maybe use some specific examples as well. But Rebecca, I'd like to start with you in terms of some of the tips that you've seen over your many years of working on this in terms of building relationships with partners and recruiting those partners.
So, yeah, certainly our most successful projects have been those that had a key local partner involved. So somebody who knew the local community or the group or was part of it, knew lots of other people to get involved, and was really passionate about the project. So being able to identify those key local stakeholders, connectors, whatever you want to call them, and getting them excited about the project and using their experience and connections and enthusiasm to draw together more partners is really important, and using them as a gateway into other people who might work with you, and particularly asking them the question of who else in this space thinks in a similar way, who's thinking of outwardly looking community engagement, innovative projects, and starting to identify who your core group might be that's then working outwards to engage maybe people who have perhaps less of an appetite for this. So yeah, definitely get linked in with those kind of core local people and community owners.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that we've definitely learned a lot about over recent years. That a lot of times we are recruiting the people to be involved, but it's when you find those community owners that you point out that do have a passion for this that really gets you somewhere, and they know the community. Steve, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I've got more experience in terms of the work I've done in the past of working with smaller grassroots organisations. And what you'll tend to find is that they're often very linked to one another. You have certain community champions, I guess, who will set up more than one organisation or be involved along the way. And the thing that always works best for me, firstly, is meeting those people wherever possible, having conversations, and allowing time to hear the work that they do before you talk about what you're doing, which can be very tricky when you're very enthusiastic about the work that you do. And then secondly, certainly ending every meeting by asking who else should you meet, who else might enjoy hearing about the work that you're doing, and focusing on not just what we're offering, but what they're doing and how we might be able to fit into that work as well. I'd also add there's very often databases out there which will list the different community organisations, and of course people get together either because of a shared background, experience or interest, so you'll very quickly start to see organisations that are linked in that way and how you could bring them into a project that you're working on.
Okay, that's a really, I really like that point and hear you loud and clear in terms of this idea of listening too. I think that just to underline your point there of working with these communities, hearing what it is they want to get out of this kind of a project as well, and build around that. It's critical.
Just to add to that point, what Steve said about getting introductions through people, I think we've certainly where we've run open events or been looking for partners, they've been most successful when people have heard about it through a personal introduction as opposed to a cold call or an email out of the blue. You tend to get much more traction if somebody's recommending you or introducing you or passing on an invitation to a friend. So those kind of social, personal networks are incredibly valuable to be kind of harnessing and working through, as opposed to just kind of, mass mailouts, which also play a role, but you sort of need the former as well.
Yeah, at least that's a good point. Lisa, are you experiencing much of this now in some of the pub work and things like that? I mean, you're hitting the ground now with this project.
Yeah, I think for us it's very important, with the pubs especially, it's very important to have someone who can introduce us to the publicans because they're really busy people. and we hope to get publicans to get involved in the process as soon as possible, and then get them to feel that they own their particular pub history and their particular the community archiving that they're hopefully going to do. So we need someone to introduce us to those publicans in such a way that they are very keen to get engaged, and sometimes cold calling doesn't work, or just deciding, oh, I want to work with this group just for the sake of working with that group doesn't always work. You have to be very generous with your time, also with your resources sometimes, and sometimes you have to be very flexible in trying to get out of it what you want to get out of it, but also how can it be useful for the community group in what they, as Steve already said, in what they want to get out of it. So you might want to be flexible, and at least open and transparent as well, because if you have a hidden agenda, people will find out, and it's not good publicity at all. So
yeah. Especially if you're drinking while you're doing this, and that
exactly.
That term publican is what does that mean? That's like a pub patron?
Yeah, publican is I've adopted that term because people say there's a term for it called landlord, but I found that to be a bit gendered, so that's why I use publican.
I see. So that's a pub owner, a publican.
A pub owner, yeah. And then you've got your regulars, or as people call them, punters, which are your the people who come to the pub regularly and drink there, and it's their stamkroeg, as they say in Dutch.
So what I'm hearing from you is the importance of making those, kind of establishing those relationships, ideally, before you come into a place, as opposed to rowing into a pub and saying, hey, we're here to gather your history.
It might work, but it might also not work.
Yeah.
It really depends on who is in that pub at the same time as you are, and rolling in and saying, hey, we're here to gather your history. So, the best thing is probably to get someone like a beer organization, or someone who knows a lot of those publicans professionally or personally, to get them to tag along with you, introduce you, and say, oh, look, this person has got a great project. Would you like to be involved? That makes you much more, your credentials come out much better then.
Sure. Okay, well, that's really helpful. Carrie, I want to pull you in on the San Francisco stuff, particularly around Year of the Bay, and your experience with working with a number of community organizations, and you've seen some things that work and don't work on this front. What would you say are kind of the top advice for recruiting the key partners, identifying them, and then how you were successfully able to work with some of them?
I would say it's much of the same as what everyone has been saying already, and it's very, very important that we kind of start with people who are either familiar with us or have worked with us before or have been recommended to us. Because these types of groups, for example, they know the kinds of things that we already do, and they kind of trust us as a partner to, they trust us with their stories and trust that we will share it in such a way that will open up conversations and do the kinds of things that they're already doing, essentially, but kind of spread out, their reach a lot more. And as opposed to recruiting individuals, it's kind of or doing cold outreach. It's that takes a lot of time for to have someone trust you. And what I've learned from Year of the Bay is you can't time that. You can't put a timestamp on that, on how long it will take for someone to be willing to work with you, or if it's the right time for them to work with you, or when they will be able to see that you're the one that they want to work with. So it's kind of very much in terms of just kind of recruiting, it's very much the same.
Yeah, that's a good point. The timing piece is important too, and something that we've learned is it usually takes longer than we'd expect to really get a relationship, gain people's trust, and get to the point where they feel like this is something they want to invest in. Sophia, is that something that's been your experience so far, or is there anything you want to add to this piece of it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to utilize existing connections, which is, of course, easier if a network already exists, like an academic network, particularly if you, as the organizer, have either been involved with that network before or are still involved with that network. And I think it's really important that in terms of reaching out to further individuals, that you ask trusted existing connections to basically connect you. Otherwise, you are cold emailing and people don't necessarily respond well to that. And I also think if you're trying to find experts in certain fields, I think there's a website, academia.edu, I think that's how you pronounce that, and LinkedIn, and I think you can find people with expertise in those kinds of areas, and local resources, local universities, libraries, colleges, local historians, community groups, museums and galleries, any institution whose purpose is to educate. And in my experience, if someone is an expert in something, they are more than likely going to be willing to share their expertise with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I want to add that if you are just trying to network within amongst community groups, you'll find that as kind of the more local events that you attend, whether they're history events or cultural events, you'll keep seeing similar faces and kind of similar people that pop up in kind of all of these types of events. So that really helps to kind of gain trust and just show that you're also willing to be involved in these similar kinds of events and you want to be involved as well. And I found that that's a good method. Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is a bit of a segue here to the individual symposium. We've been very generic actually about the partners, which is interesting to me and hearing from all you guys. A lot of times we assume that they could be libraries, archives, or museums, and a lot of our projects they have been. They can also be school groups, they can be retirement communities, they can be local groups. I think we all work with quite a different range of these groups. So let's say, let's assume that you've got those partnerships in place. You feel like you've got some good excitement around the organizations that are involved. A lot of times we're also actually recruiting individuals to do things, and this is a key piece of it. So Steve, I want to start with you in terms of some of the things that you've seen really work on the ground for getting individuals out to an event and finding the right people who you want to talk to on this regard.
Sure. So I think what's tended to work best for me in the past is being very grassroots. Certainly, I think, as Kerry said, having my face there, being in the room and being able to meet people and talk to people who may want to get involved. Secondly, I'd say if you're working with a museum or institution, as we have done in Becontree on This Used to Be Fields, is to spend some time talking to people from that institution, asking why they might want people involved, perhaps what resources they already use to recruit people into volunteer roles within their museum or institution, and then how Historypin or new activities could fit within that. And also whether they're looking to recruit a new group of people that aren't already engaged, as that's something that Historypin can be very helpful in using to do. So the two things I'd say: firstly, being grassroots, being on the ground, meeting people wherever possible face to face, and secondly, recruiting through organisations where possible. I'd perhaps add that, of course, there's groups that naturally attract volunteers and individuals. Certainly faith groups do so very well indeed. Groups that have a shared purpose, so for example, Friends of Valence Park, where we're working, where they'll recruit people to work on the land itself adjacent to the museum. That gets people actively involved, but they may also be happy to get involved in another way, in kind of digitally recording, preserving, documenting what they're working on as a starting point.
Great. Does anyone else have any thoughts on things that have worked for you on the individual level?
In terms of kind of recruiting individuals that both through community groups and just recruiting individuals kind of who have never heard of you before, I find that it's sometimes helpful to kind of do an example pin for them, either of their content or kind of an example piece of content to Historypin, because it's really I've found that it's very important for an individual to kind of visualize how their content will look on Historypin before they start pinning, just if they're not familiar with us, just to know how everything works and how people can interact with their content, and just showing them that it's a process that they could do by themselves, essentially, but kind of overcoming that hurdle of making them start up all by themselves. And many people don't have Gmails or Facebook or Twitter, sometimes, from my experience. So kind of starting a new Gmail for them and opening, showing them how to open an account and putting example content is hugely helpful, and it's a big, it lowers the barrier to participation quite a lot.